Good morning, Europe. Welcome to the program. Our top stories for you this hour. Mexico's new president. Mexicans elect a new leftist leader after one of the deadliest election campaigns in history. Coalition crisis. Angela Merkel faces a showdown with her interior minister, who has offered to resign over the EU migration deal. And over in the Cube, our social media news desk.
The dramatic prison break. We have the video from inside the prison as a notorious French gangster escapes again.
Inching closer, rescuers make small progress in the week-long search for 12 boys and their football coach who went missing in a Thai cave. And more World Cup surprises. We'll bring you all the twists and turns from Russia. Thank you for starting your morning with us. We begin with breaking news from Mexico this morning. Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or AMLO, is Mexico's next president. Well, he's the clear winner of Sunday's election and will be the country's first leftist leader in decades. That's at a time of tense relations with the Trump administration. Exit polls put the former mayor of Mexico City with a lead of more than 20 percentage points over his competitors and winning between 46.8% and 59% of the vote. He's pledged to crack down on corruption and fight social inequality, giving preference to, quote, the most humble and forgotten in one of the bloodiest election campaigns in history. Well, joining me now is your news correspondent, Alistair Sanford, who has been watching this morning's drama unfold. Alistair, so Obrador, it looks like it's done and dusted. We're waiting for the final numbers. How big of a deal is this for Mexico?
It looks like it's going to be a huge change for Mexico. The centrists and the conservatives have ruled basically for the last century, especially the centrists, for something like almost all but 12 years of the last 89. So here we've got a leftist president. We've got the first results coming in the last half hour or so. The Electoral Authority has said that a quick count shows that he's got over 53% of the vote, and his rivals have now conceded defeat, and outgoing President Enrique Nieto has given a TV address acknowledging that. All this is within the context, of course, of corruption and violence. Those are the two big themes for Mexico. And the López Obrador, who's an ex-mayor of Mexico City, very close to the people there, he's vowed to tackle corruption, and he's given a speech just in the last hour or so saying that this will happen within the rule of law. A very inclusive speech he gave, not talking about repression, but about being very firm. His critics, of course, say that he lacks substance and it's all words.
Yeah, and also, of course, in the context of this is U.S. President Donald Trump, who, in fact, has tweeted this a moment ago. Let me just read it. Congratulations to Andrés Manuel López Obrador on becoming the next president of Mexico. I look very much forward to working with him. There is much to be done about what will benefit both the United States and Mexico, end quote. So is there any indication from AMLO about how he will deal with the U.S. president?
There is. First of all, yes, I mean, that tweet is really quite startling. It's very early from Donald Trump to tweet like that. That's not usual in Latin American elections. And of course, what's striking is how that compares with his belligerent rhetoric towards Mexico and all the talk of the wall and the free trade treaty. Yes, AMLO has given in his speech, he only talked about the US towards the end of the speech, but it was very conciliatory, saying that basically he wanted to seek a friendly relationship and cooperation based on mutual respect, but also defending his countrymen living in the US. Remember, of course, all the talk of clamping down on illegal migrants. So the big question, how will they get on? They both have similarities. They're both kind of outsiders, both see themselves as populists, but Obrador's been around for a long time. If he stands up to Trump, perhaps the American president, as we've seen with other leaders, he'll respect that. That's all remains to be seen.
All right. Thank you for that, Alistair Sanford. Of course, we're keeping a close eye on this story, and we will bring you more throughout the day. Now, the German government is in crisis this morning, and the political future of Chancellor Angela Merkel is in question. She was handed another blow last night when Interior Minister and leader of the CSU coalition party, Horst Seehofer, he offered to step down. And it comes amid a fundamental disagreement over migration. Jessica Saltz has the story.
Germany's Interior Minister has offered to resign, escalating a row over migration with Chancellor Angela Merkel that threatens her fragile government. Horst Seehofer said he would quit as both minister and as chair of his Christian Social Union. His announcement came as his party discussed the immigration proposals Merkel brought back from Brussels last week. It makes the future of Merkel's government even more uncertain, since her Christian Democratic Party relies on the Bavarian Conservative CSU to maintain power. The coalition was only formed 3 months ago, ending a political vacuum which existed since last year's September election. Last week, Seehofer threatened to turn asylum seekers away from Germany's borders unless Merkel reached an acceptable deal with other EU partners. Late on Sunday, Merkel's Christian Democratic Union passed a resolution supporting her position on migration.
That was our correspondent Jessica Saltz reporting there, and she joins me live now from Berlin. Jessica, so we heard there Seehofer's resignation is on the table, but it hasn't actually been accepted. Is he serious or is it political posturing?
Yes, we saw Horst Seehofer place a last-minute ultimatum on Angela Merkel, whether he'll continue to work with her as an interior minister. He said that the deals that she brought back from Brussels last week do not go far enough to curb migration into Germany. He instead is pushing his so-called master plan on migration. But, of course, these tensions have been mounting between Seehofer and Merkel in recent weeks, and in fact between their two respective parties. And this is more than just the issue of migration. This is also a real political standoff between these two parties, and in fact it's being seen as Horst Seehofer trying to challenge Angela Merkel's authority. So I think we'll see some last-ditch attempts for talks today. Of course, Seehofer has also been accused of prioritising politics in Bavaria rather than national politics. Of course, Bavaria has an election coming up in October where migration's been made a key focal issue. However, it must be said that this anti-Merkel stance that Seehofer and some of his other CSU members have taken has reflected very badly on them in opinion polls. So talks between Seehofer and Merkel will take place today. Will she be able to get him back on
Jessica,
side? Of course, this remains to be seen.
Yeah, indeed. Of course, this is a headache for Angela Merkel. And what does she have to do now to keep the government together?
Well, I think in some ways it would be a bit of a relief if Seehofer did resign, because there's been mutiny in the ranks in the Conservative alliance from the CSU party on the issue of migration, and he's been a very vocal ringleader. And it, of course, would remove the problem of Angela Merkel of whether or not to fire him if the CSU party did decide to work unilaterally and turn migrants away from the border. However, if Seehofer does resign, or if indeed he is fired by Angela Merkel, this will leave a gaping void of the job of Interior Minister in the government and just highlight how fractured the Conservative alliance is at the moment. So a real headache from Angela Merkel. She does have the broad support from her CDU party and also the Social Democrats on her migrant deal, but many tensions remain within the government at the moment.
All right, thank you, Jessica Saltz, for keeping an eye on this story. And now on to France, where a notorious gangster has pulled off a dramatic prison break for the second time in 5 years. Alex has the story from the Cube. Alex.
You've heard about getaway cars, Tessa, right? But how about getaway helicopters? That is what this story is all about. A dramatic rescue that's been called spectacular by the French Justice Minister because of its daring and its audacity. Just check out this video. Now, this video you can see here was filmed by an inmate in Réau, a prison south of Paris. What you are seeing here is a video shot through the bars of the compound as a notorious French gangster is lifted in a helicopter out. So how the story unfolded, the prisoner was meeting with his brother in the visitor room when armed men stormed in and got him out. They then took him to a courtyard where a helicopter was waiting under armed guard. The pilots of the helicopter had been taken prisoner. So then they got in the helicopter and made this dramatic escape. It's obviously that small little black blob you can see there being the helicopter in that video. There were then cheers on that video from the inmates. But the first question a lot of people were asking when this was circulating is, well, how can we tell this is what it's supposed to show? Well, Rachel here on our team in the Cube has been verifying this video this morning using geolocation. And Issy, we can just show on this map very quickly here. This is a satellite picture of that prison with two key features that helped us confirm this video from coming from that location. First, this white box here, and then second, this little red bar here. And that equates to this white box on the roof here and this red bar here we saw in the video from the cellmate. So we're comfortable saying the video comes from within the prison, showing the escape of this notorious gangster. So who is he and why was he there in the first place? It's very easy to get carried away with how exciting this is, but the reality is that this man was in prison for, in the past, among many crimes, the death of a policewoman in a previous raid, serving a 25-year prison sentence. Redouane Fayed serving a prison sentence for that. So while he was a notorious gangster and people are talking about how exciting this is, it's like a film, The reality is he was a criminal. He is now on the run, and French authorities are looking for any more information. Tessa.
Thank you for that incredible story. Thanks, Alex. And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe, inching closer. Thai rescue workers step up their efforts to try and reach the missing schoolboys and their coach. We will have the latest from Thailand. And who's in and who's out of the World Cup following last night's dramatic penalty shootouts. That's after a short break. You're watching Good Morning Europe. Our top story, a new president from Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or AMLO, has claimed victory. The opposition has conceded. Outgoing President Peña Nieto congratulated him and pledged to work with him in the transition. Obrador has pledged to crack down on corruption and fight social inequality. To Thailand now, where there's still no sign of life from 12 boys and their soccer coach 9 days after they went missing in a cave in the north of the country. Flooding has hampered the search for the boys, who are aged between 11 and 16. Over the weekend, rescue teams have been pumping water out of the caves so divers can reach underground chambers where it's hoped they may have taken shelter. Journalist Tony Cheng has been with the rescue team at the site over the weekend, and I'm joined by him now. Tony, good to see you there. It's been 9 days now. That's a lot of time since the boys went missing. What are the chances of finding them now and knowing the conditions since you were there?
Well, we understand this morning that the Thai Navy SEALs who spearheaded the search and rescue attempt are within 400 meters of getting to Pattaya Beach. Now, that's a large cavern where there's known to be a large bit of sand which they think would not have been submerged by floodwaters, which we've seen over the last week. They've been trying to get there for the last 5 days. They haven't been able to because of the bad weather conditions. But yesterday and today have both been clear of rain. They think they'll be able to get there by the end of today. Now, there's absolutely no guaranteeing at this stage they'll actually find anything. But they think, from what they know of the boys' movements inside the cave, that's the most likely place they would have found shelter. They have been trying to drop food and clothes through large openings in the roof of the cavern, but again, they can't tell if there's anyone down there. They don't know exactly where they are, but at least they're moving forward.
Tony, can you give us a bit more tell us more visually what it's like over there, since you saw what it was like pumping water out of a cave. You were talking about sand. Can you just describe that area and how difficult it is?
It is incredibly difficult. There's a large cavern where you go in, where we were able to get in the first couple of days. But beyond that, it narrows down to very small, really single-person walkways which go up and down. And what's happened in the last week is that heavy rains have created floodwaters, which have flooded a lot of those caves. So while the progress that they're making today is very good, they're actually only retracing the steps that they got to last Wednesday. The water pumps that they brought in initially didn't work because they needed electricity. Obviously, putting electricity into waterlogged caves is very problematic. And it has been a very chaotic search and rescue effort with enormous numbers of people there, but only a very small handful of the right skilled people. They do, however, now seem to be on track. They've got aid coming in from 6 different nations, and they seem to be making significant progress. But it's now 9 days on, and the conditions inside the caves are very bad. These are young children. We don't know what condition they were in when they went in, if they had any supplies with them. So while everybody is hoping for the best, and they say they won't stop until they find these boys, at the same time, it is going to be very difficult to get to them, and we have absolutely no idea what condition they'll be in when they do find them.
Indeed. Okay, thank you for that, journalist Tony Cheng, who was at the site there in Thailand where the boys are being rescued. Thank you very much. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump has asked Saudi Arabia to raise its oil output to combat rising oil prices in the wake of sanctions against Iran. Now, it comes as Iran's President Hassan Rouhani arrives in Switzerland today for talks. Your News' Evelyn Laverick has the story.
The US may not be a member of the oil producers group OPEC, but President Donald Trump is still weighing in with all his might to influence oil production. He's leaning on Saudi Arabia, the group's top producer, to step up output in a bid to combat the rising cost of fuel. On Saturday, in a tweet, he claimed that King Salman had already agreed to boost output by 2 million barrels a day, an assurance later qualified by the kingdom, saying it could do so if needed. Saudi Arabia currently produces about 10 million barrels a day. It's reported to have up to 2 million barrels of spare capacity, but analysts say it would be reluctant to increase output as it would be too expensive. The rush to stabilise the oil market has been triggered by the US telling its allies to cut all oil purchases from another OPEC member, Iran, to zero by November as it prepares to reinstate sanctions against the country. Tehran has accused Trump of trying to politicise the group and has blamed Riyadh for doing his bidding. Iran's supreme leader said at the weekend that the US was trying to drive a wedge between Iranians and their government using economic pressure. The Iranian rial has lost 40% of its value since last month, casting a chill over the economy and leading to protests in Tehran. Unrest in Venezuela and Libya has also contributed to reduced output and rising prices at the pumps. Trump may be exercising his diplomatic muscles to get his way. Forecasters are still warning of a bumpy ride on the oil markets. Evelyn Laverick, Euronews.
And for more on what all this means, let's talk to our economics editor, Sasha Vakulina. Sasha, good to see you there. What has been the market reaction to, the Trump tweet?
Well, that's been a bumpy ride, as Evelyn said in her report. But actually, this morning, on Monday morning, we saw oil prices falling by more than 1%. That's, of course, on the news that Saudi Arabia could actually pump more. Brent is currently trading at $78 per barrel. But over the past 12 months, if we look at Brent, which is, of course, the industry benchmark, the price has risen by more than 65%. And so while Trump accuses OPEC of manipulating the oil market, actually his threats and then his decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal has had a bigger impact on the oil market.
Yeah, obviously when we talk about oil prices, we're talking about the markets and politics, but ultimately it's about people using oil and gas. What is the impact on real people?
Yeah, that's actually about all of us feeling afterwards the pain at the pump, right? So in the US, American drivers felt the 55 cent a gallon higher prices than the same time a year ago. This is what's happening now. And also, the US president tweet came just as many Americans were heading for their long weekend for the 4th of July. It normally takes around 2-3 weeks for the prices to translate into what we pay afterwards for the retail. We're definitely going to feel that. At the same time, let's not forget that's the summer period. Many people are going on holiday. They're going to be using their cars. They're going to be filling their tanks. And as for for example, the airplanes, for the air companies, for the fares, this will take a while because normally companies are hedging some prices. That will take a while. Hopefully, we won't see big price rise over the summer.
Well, there's that hope, indeed. Thank you for that, Sasha Vakulina, our business editor. Thanks. And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe, preparing for a no-deal Brexit. Well, Britain's health bosses say they're working to ensure European medical supplies will still be available, even if politicians can't agree. And over in the Cube,
we have the latest as Maltese authorities clamp down on the captain of a migrant rescue ship. But first, let's take a break.
You're watching Good Morning Europe. We're taking you live now to Mexico, where we see supporters of the new president-elect López Obrador. They're celebrating on the streets, clearly happy about his victory. Now, Obrador, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, is the country's first leftist leader in decades, and his win, his election, is seen as a message from the people to go against the status quo. They want him to tackle corruption as well as the economic situation of the country. Well, we're keeping an eye on this story, and as you're seeing, live celebrations there in Mexico City on the victory of AMLO, as he is known. Now, Austria has officially taken over its 6-month presidency of the European Council from Bulgaria. Chancellor Sebastian Kurz, who is known for his hardline views on migration, will lead the council until the end of the year. So, what direction will the bloc in the midst of a migration crisis take with Austria at the reins? Live in Brussels with more is your news correspondent Brian Carter. Brian, tell us what this all means, Austria's presidency of the EU.
Well, as you said, Tessa, they just took over from Bulgaria. The rotating presidency is an institution within the EU Council that basically sets the agenda, organizes and chairs the meetings and the working groups, basically all the work that goes on behind the scenes. Now, ever since the famous Lisbon Treaty of 2007, which created the permanent position of President of the Council, currently assumed by Donald Tusk, the rotating presidency has lost some of its political role, but it still carries a lot of influence. And then, of course, the type of government in place in the country that has the presidency has influence in the way the agenda will be set. And the current government in Austria is made up of the Conservative Party of Chancellor Sebastian Kurz and of the far-right Freedom Party of Austria, the FPO. So clearly they have a very strong stance on migration, very anti-migrant rhetoric, and this translates into their presidency. The theme of the presidency is a Europe that protects, and the first item on their agenda, their first priority, is to fight against illegal migration by securing external borders. So clearly migration will be the number one issue over the next 6 months with this Austrian presidency. They also want to talk about competitiveness and neighborhood policy with the EU, with the Western Balkan states. But it's also likely that over the next 6 months, we'll see a lot of discussions and work around the EU budget, the next EU budget, and of course, Brexit. Tessa?
A lot of work, as you talk about there. Brian, briefly, how will the other EU leaders receive this Austrian presidency?
Well, quite well, actually. There's been a clear shift in discourse between 2015 and now, when some measures back then were deemed unacceptable, such as these so-called disembarkation platforms for migrants, are now completely acceptable. One MEP I talked to actually called it the Orbanization of politics, after, of course, Viktor Orban of Hungary. And Sebastian Kurz is actually very close to the Visegrad group and to their anti-migrant stance and their strong approach to migration. But there's still a lot of questions regarding the agreement that was found here by EU leaders on Thursday and Friday. What are these controlled centers? What are these disembarkation platforms? Basically, they're just another way of saying detention camps. But there's still a lot of discussion, a lot of uncertainty as to where they will be and which country will accept to host them. Austria clearly indicated that they were not interested, and there's still no step forward made in two of the key issues, which are the Dublin regulation and the secondary movement of migrants. So Austria will try to, of course, will have a lot of work trying to deal with these two issues. Tessa?
All right, thank you for that. Brian Carter reporting there from Brussels. Thanks. Now, 48 people in northern India have died after an overcrowded bus skidded off a steep mountain road and plunged into a gorge. The 28-seater bus was carrying 60 people when it veered off the road into a valley in the state of Uttarakhand. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has expressed his grief at the incident. Firefighters are battling to put out a wildfire in northern English moorland in what they've declared as arson. Hot weather and high winds caused two wildfires to merge in the British county of Lancashire, covering an area of 8 square kilometres. It comes as firefighters and army work together to fight another wildfire in neighbouring Manchester, which started a week ago. Well, coming up, we'll look at all our top stories, including that political crisis in Germany, where Angela Merkel's interior minister has offered to resign. But does that mean she is in trouble as well? Now, also in Paris, where that dramatic escape from a French prison by helicopter took place by a notorious gangster. And after a thrilling World Cup weekend, quarterfinals are shaping up. But before that, let's look at today's No Comment from Paris, where one of France's most famous politicians, Simone Veil, she was given that rare honor of burial at the Pantheon. She was a Holocaust survivor and a defender of women's rights. Our top stories on Good Morning Europe. Angela Merkel faces a showdown with her interior minister, who was offered to resign over the EU migration deal. And over in the Cube, our social media news desk.
We have the latest as another migrant rescue ship heads for Europe.
Mexico's new president. Mexicans elect a new leftist leader after one of the deadliest election campaigns in history. And remember France's so-called Spider-Man who scaled a wall to save a child? Well, we have news about him. Germany's fragile coalition government is once again in crisis this morning, and the political future of Chancellor Angela Merkel is in question. She was dealt another blow last night when Interior Minister and leader of the CSU coalition party Horst Seehofer offered to step down from both posts. It comes amid a fundamental disagreement over migration. Well, late on Sunday, Merkel's CDU party passed a resolution supporting her position on the issue. The CDU relies on the Bavarian CSU to maintain power. And for more on this, Jessica Solz joins us live again from Berlin. Jessica, can you tell us more about what's happening in Germany today?
Well, Tessa, of course, the political wrangling continues today. Last-ditch talks between Angela Merkel and Horst Seehofer. And for more insight on this, I've got Matthew Karnichnik, who is the chief Europe correspondent of Politico. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us. Now, Horst Seehofer in recent hours has said he is going to resign as Interior Minister. Then he said he isn't going to resign. What do you make of this political flip-flopping?
Well, I think there's definitely some division within the CSU, within Seehofer's party, about what path they should take here. And I think that he has, a lot of support for taking the hard line that he has. But when it got close to the deadline yesterday and it really started to hit people in the CSU leadership, what was happening here, I think they wanted him to take a little bit more time to sleep on it, to come back tomorrow, to sit down with Merkel again and see if they could come up with some kind of compromise.
And so they will be meeting today, Horst Seehofer and Angela Merkel. Of course, the pressure is on the German Chancellor as well. What do you think she's hoping to get out of these talks with Horst Seehofer?
Well, clearly she wants to do whatever she can to keep the union together, to keep this fraternity of the CDU and the CSU together. And I think that, there's a good chance that she could succeed here if she can offer Seehofer something which would allow him to save face. And then in the end, he might end up resigning anyway, but she will have succeeded in keeping the union together and in keeping the government intact.
And we have yet to hear whether Horst Seehofer will resign. We also have yet to hear if the CSU will indeed back Angela Merkel's migrant deal. How does the next few weeks and months look for Angela Merkel on this very pertinent issue of migration, do you think?
Well, I think it's clear that whatever happens now, if the government collapses, obviously it would be a disaster for Merkel. But even if she can get a deal here today or in the coming days, I think that she emerges from this whole crisis much weaker than she was before. She's already a bit of a lame duck because the expectation is that this is going to be her last term. And I think this shows that she really has a crisis within her own conservative base, where many of the people, even in her own party, even in the CDU, are really unhappy with the policies that she's pursued on the refugee front and on other issues. And I think she's going to have a really hard time in the coming months to maintain the authority that she's had over the past years.
Thank you very much, Matthew. So there we go, Tessa. A very difficult day ahead for Angela Merkel, and indeed weeks and months ahead on the issue of migration.
All right, thank you for that, Jessica Solz and Matthew Karnichnik, chief Europe correspondent of Politico. Thanks. Now, a ship carrying around 60 rescued migrants are heading to Spain after Italy and Malta refused it entry. Alex in the Cube has more on this story. Alex.
Seems to be the recurring story, doesn't it, Tessa? A political row between European nations about who should help the people rescued in the Mediterranean. I just want to start this morning with some rather alarming figures that have been brought out of the death toll so far in the Mediterranean this year. 204 drownings off the coast of Libya this weekend. That is since this show ceased broadcasting on Friday and this morning. 204 people have drowned, and that brings the total to 1,000 according to the UN migration. That's over 1,000 people for the fourth consecutive year who've drowned in the Mediterranean. And you may well have seen over the weekend the image of 3 lifeless children being carried ashore, and that's been the human face of these really alarming figures. Well, a lot of charities saying those children needn't have drowned, their boat overturned, and they could have been rescued. So this is the ongoing discussion as well about who should save these people, who's responsible for protecting them, and what might be pulling them across. I just want to bring you the pictures from on board that latest rescue ship, bound now for Spain, after Italy and Malta had another spat over who should help them. Well, the Spanish have said, we will take them in. 60 migrants rescued Saturday morning. We've been in contact with the boat and the mission leader on the boat, who says they're now in the Sicilian Channel, heading to Barcelona, due to arrive there on Wednesday morning. Conditions, they say, are very difficult. But a tweet, the charity praising a proactive Open Arms, praising the Spanish authorities for taking the lead on this. And that's very much the tone we got from that EU summit, where the Spanish seemed to strike a much more, perhaps you could call it a humanitarian line on this issue. Remember the other vessel we talked to you about, the one that is docked in Malta, Mission Lifeline, that was at the centre of another argument between Italy and Malta? Well, they have been issued with this, a court summons. The captain is due to appear in a Maltese court, and we've read the summons, and if he does not appear, he will be arrested. So just very quickly to finish on this, there's now a grassroots fundraising campaign to pay the legal fees for Mission Lifeline, this charity NGO, to support their ongoing work. So very political issue, but on social media we're seeing this campaign this morning, a lot of support, but also criticism as well. Tessa.
All right, thank you for that, Alex, for keeping an eye on this story. Now, back to our top story for today. Remember this name, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. He's also known as AMLO. He's the new face of Mexico, and he's the clear winner of Sunday's presidential election. He will be the country's first leftist leader in decades. Exit polls show the former mayor of Mexico City winning between 46.8% and 59% of the vote, with a lead of more than 20 percentage points over his competitors. He has pledged to crack down on corruption and fight social inequality, giving preference to, quote, the most humble and forgotten. And for more on what he has said and what this all means, let's cross over to Alistair Sanford, who's joining me in the studio. Alistair, again, he has run before. This is not the first time. In fact, this is the third time. What's different?
Yes, Andrés Manuel López Obrador has run twice before, in 2006 and 2012. He hasn't come out of nowhere. What's different this time? The context of violence and corruption and the failure of the authorities to deal with it. He's a veteran. He's known. He was mayor of Mexico City in the early 2000s, and he's very close to the people there. He's very popular, especially in poor districts. Now, he's made tackling corruption a central plank of his election campaign, and in his speech, he made a big thing just an hour or so ago of wanting to tackle it. There is a lot of collusion with the drugs cartels. A lot of money in contracts gets siphoned off, and people are fed up with this. Now, interestingly, AMLO said that corruption is not cultural in Mexico, but it's a result of the political regime. And he said the way to combat it is to get to the root causes, to combat poverty and inequality. His other aims are to raise pay and welfare payments, and he's also stressed the need for fiscal discipline. Clamping down on corruption, of course, will be central to this. And, of course, his opponents say that he's a dangerous populist who doesn't really have substance behind his words. But it's not just a one-man presidency. There have been elections across the board in Mexico. And if this support for him is reflected across Congress and also the 18,000 posts that were up for grabs, then he could have some considerable weight behind him.
Indeed, and one of the primary missions, he said, was to, again, eradicate corruption and impunity as well. We can't gloss over the fact that this has been one of the most violent campaigns we've seen, even candidates getting killed.
It's mind-boggling. I mean, if we take just a look at some of the figures, since the campaign began last September, 130 candidates and party workers have been killed. That's up until the end of the campaign in June. Last year, 25,000 murders, or even more, according to some estimates. And there are. It's said that figure could even rise this year. Those are phenomenal numbers, and particularly in the areas where drug cartels are more powerful, effectively, than the local authorities. It's a very dangerous country for journalists. Reporters Without Borders says that it's the most dangerous country after Syria, with 11 journalists killed there last year. How to reduce all this violence? Well, AMLO's predecessors went to war, basically, but have failed. Now, his speech didn't dwell on the violence specifically, but much more on the conditions that create it. He's certainly given a much more inclusive response about tackling this, but very much within the rule of law.
Indeed, a lot of people saying enough is enough. Thank you, Alistair Sanford, for that. Now, Britain's National Health Service says it started, quote, significant planning to ensure patients get medicines in time in case there is a no Brexit deal reached with the EU. And for more on this, we're joined by Vincent McAviney, who is joining me now live. Vincent, so last week, the UK's doctors' unions warned that leaving the EU would be bad for Britain's health. Can you tell us what's at stake?
Good morning, Tessa. Well, you might remember a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about a leaked Whitehall document which looked at the no deal and hard Brexit scenarios and painted a bit of a doomsday picture. They said that the port of Dover would close within a day and that would have serious implications for the British National Health Service. But it seems the NHS is taking this threat seriously. Simon Stevens, the head of NHS England, yesterday admitted that they're doing extensive planning for that possible no-deal Brexit to make sure that supplies of medicine and equipment just aren't interrupted. He said they're working with other government departments, and we know from that leaked report that will include the Ministry of Defence. They would be using RAF planes and they'd be chartering other planes to medevac supplies around the UK to make sure that patients weren't missing out. The NHS is also the biggest employer in the United Kingdom. Lots of people from overseas work in it. Simon Stevens said that they've now instructed all hospitals to speak to NHS staff from the EU to sort out their papers. So Theresa May in a difficult position. She's got to protect the health of the NHS. She'll be here in the House of Commons later to update on that EU Council meeting. And before she can do anything to try to protect the NHS from this, she's got to strike a deal, getting her split cabinet to agree. They'll have an away day again at the end of the week, and this will be one of the issues that they'll be looking at.
All right, thank you for that, Vincent McAviney in London there. And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe, we'll be looking at the rising levels of anti-Semitism in Europe. That and much more after the break. Welcome back. You're watching Good Morning Europe. Anti-Semitism is on the rise in Europe, with France in particular severely affected. Your news reporter Valérie Goria has spoken to people in France and Germany's Jewish communities in search of answers.
A Syrian refugee in Berlin attacking an innocent passerby just because he was Jewish. The offender was arrested and this week convicted. Anti-Semitic incidents are also increasingly violent in France. The Jewish community represents 1% of the population, yet is the target of 50% of hate crimes. At least 11 people were killed since 2005 just because they were Jewish. In a climate of fear, some turned to self-defense, like Nathaniel. While wearing a kippah, he and his brother were attacked by a man armed with a saw.
If I hadn't known how to defend myself, and I hadn't known how to disarm him, I couldn't have helped my brother. This sport saved me from dying with my brother.
Civil society is reacting throughout Europe. In Germany, schools in Frankfurt distributed kippahs in a day of solidarity. In a city-run initiative, people were urged to stand up to anti-Semitism by wearing a kippah for an entire day.
Anti-Semitism has many layers. It is fueled by extremist right-wing anti-Semitism, marching with the usual black combat boots. It's also fueled by leftist anti-Semitism, starting with criticizing Israel and evolving from anti-Zionism into anti-Semitism. And of course, we see more and more, though I would not reduce it exclusively to this point, anti-Semitism coming from those communities where Jews, and in particular Israeli Jews, are regarded as bogeymen.
Jews are becoming increasingly worried. What are the causes of this new wave of anti-Semitism? Are newly arrived Muslim migrants to blame as well as far-right groups? Has Europe become a new front in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? Questions which are feeding a heated debate throughout Europe.
Valérie Goria with that report on anti-Semitism in Europe. And for more on that, you can watch our current affairs program, Insiders. That's tonight at 8:40 CET. Now, this year's Football World Cup in Russia has been full of surprises, and that trend continued this weekend. I'm joined by your news correspondent, Andy Rubini, with all the news. Andy, tell us, what are the highlights?
The game to watch this weekend was definitely France-Argentina. It was a 4-3 win for France, thanks to a man-of-the-match performance from the young, talented Kylian Mbappe, who became the second teenager to score a brace of goals in the World Cup. Only one player, Tessa, before was able to do this in the World Cup. Who was he? think the world's greatest, Brazil, Samba, not Maradona? Pelé, of course. By the end of this World Cup, you'll know all the answers to my questions, promise. Great performance from France. I said before the game that Argentina would have a big problem if they didn't reduce the gap between the defence and the midfield. Didier Deschamps' men exploited this mistake throughout the game and eventually prevailed. It will be very hard against their next opponents, Uruguay. Uruguay beat Portugal and showed how strong they were. They are very solid defensively through the likes of Godin and Jimenez, but also going forward with Suarez and also the top goal scorer for PSG, Cavani.
And we do have a lot of fan reaction. And just looking at the images, a lot of disappointed fans as well as very euphoric fans. Tell us about that.
Upsets for sure. I mean, after Germany, it's time for Spain to go home. Fair play to the hosts, Russia. They definitely had a game plan. This was to stay solid and compact like behind, but also try their luck going forward. And they were able to destabilize this Spanish team. It went to penalties, and Russia will face Croatia, who also won on penalties against Denmark. Not the most riveting of games. I was expecting more from key players like Modric, Perisic, Rakitic, but in the end, it wasn't to be, but Croatia still prevailed and will lock horns with Russia in the quarterfinals.
All right, thank you, Andy. Don't test me on football. Thank you for that, Andy. Day one at work, we catch up with a hero dubbed France's Spider-Man after he rescued a young boy dangling from a balcony. Welcome back to Good Morning Europe. Now, back in May, a Malian man, he was hailed a hero for scaling that 4-story building in Paris to save a young boy dangling from the balcony. Well, it turns out we have more on him. We have an update. Alex.
Tessa, we do. The world's short on heroes, so it's nice to have one we can go back to and follow his story. Mamadou Gassama grabbed the headlines when he rescued a 4-year-old dangling from a balcony in Paris. If you've forgotten the scenes, this is a little clip from that video. A child dangling here. Mamadou was just walking past, he saw this, and then he just thought to himself, I'll scale the building and save the child. He didn't think twice, and he climbed up the building and rescued this infant. Obviously, catching the attention of the world. French President Emmanuel Macron meeting with him. In fact, you remember he was on Good Morning Europe. He spoke to our Annalise Bourgès and told of his story and how his plan to set up a new life in France was taking shape. Well, we can now tell you a little more about that new life in France. He wanted to be a rescue worker, and this is the first photograph we have of him alongside other Paris fire and rescue workers. Here he is in the back of this class photo of these volunteer firefighters, fulfilling his dream of helping people and setting up a new life here in France. Now, it's worth saying that he inspired a lot of people at the time, and the fact he's now gone on to settle down and set up a new life has, for a lot of people who are in favour of migration, let's not forget Mamadou was an undocumented migrant from Mali. You know, they've said this is the example of the kind of people who are in this country who should be helped. So when people have all this discussion about the problems of migration, they shouldn't forget that there are people like him. So he was very much seen as a positive face on a story that has been very divisive for Europe and particularly for France. But I just also want to bring up just a little tweet about the latest chapter in his story. And this is from Angela here saying, fantastic. I hope he has a long and happy life. What a hero. Happy news alert. How often do you see happy news alerts going on first thing in the morning? So there we go. The story is from climbing the balcony, Mamadou Gassama, now a volunteer firefighter in Paris, pictured alongside his colleagues here. What do you think of the story? You can let us know using #TheCube.
More happy stories, please, Alex.
Happy news alert.
Thank you for that. And thank you for joining us on Good Morning Europe. Do stay with Euronews and Euronews.com for all of your top stories. In the meantime, we'll leave you with today's No Comment from Mexico City.